What's up, everybody? Are you tired of having people walk all over you? Or maybe you need to set some boundaries, but you just don't know how. Well, you are in luck because today's episode, we're going to be talking about boundaries and, more importantly, why boundaries suck. So, welcome to the Existential Stoic podcast. I'm Randy. That's my buddy Danny. What's up, Danny?
What's up, Randy?
Yeah, so this past week, I had an incident that occurred where I had to set some boundaries and it sucked. And then it made me think, hey, let's do an
Yeah.
episode on why boundaries suck. Because every self-help book, all they talk about is, oh, you need to set boundaries. Boundaries are great. Set your boundaries. Oh, you need to set boundaries. You're not an adult if you don't set boundaries. You need to set boundaries. Just set more boundaries. Everything you want is there if you just set
Yeah.
boundaries. Yeah.
And no, you're right though, because they talk about constantly, but they never talk about how hard it is. They always make it seem like boundaries is the easiest thing, but they're not. They're difficult because usually when you're setting boundaries, you're going against all the like feelings of obligation, all the feelings of like tradition, all this past historical crap that you carry with you. It's really literally boundaries are blocking that off. And it's super hard. It's very hard. So they do suck because setting them, I mean, it can make you feel terrible at first. It can be really challenging. I think they are super healthy and helpful, but they're also really difficult. And it's common for people to try to set them and it fails numerous times before they get it right. And they
Yeah.
never
And,
mention
and
that because it's like,
Well, it's almost like they're missing the definition of boundaries because a boundary exists. We don't have the boundary because right now life is going exactly easy enough for us at the moment. It's like just
yeah,
easy enough to where this is okay. And the same thing was happening with me. So I had this acquaintance that like was just clearly taking advantage of me. But like the relationship was good for me as well. But every time we met up, I just got so frustrated and so angry that I was still like meeting up with this person. And so
yeah,
it just got to be too much. And then I was like, forget it. We're done. Boundaries here. No more. Like I just won't accept this anymore. And then I was like, oh, but now I miss this and like all this stuff. And then it was difficult and it was like all this stuff. And then I was like, boundaries suck. And like, I that stuff like that has happened to me in relationships previously with
yeah.
ex-girlfriends and stuff because you want to break up, so you break up, but then you miss them and you think about all the good stuff and you're like, but maybe it'll work out. And it's just like boundaries just suck.
They do. I think they do suck. And like getting them to work well and getting to the point where you can really set effective, healthy boundaries and boundaries that work for you too. Because I think that's the other problem. Like a lot of these self-help books, the boundaries are very rigid and they act like it's simple. Like, and it's not. It's very complicated. And I know what you mean too, because a lot of relationships, we have a lot of acquaintances, I think, where, like Aristotle said, where they're not true or perfect friendships. They're just friendships based on utility, on pleasure, or on, usefulness. And so you get something out of it, but they're getting something out of it as well. And so you have to be careful that you're not, basically getting taken advantage of or something. And that's keeping that boundary, even though you might want to still hang out with the person, there's got to be something in place. So your limits and you're clear about expressing what you want, basically, and what's acceptable to you.
Yeah. And also, I mean, boundaries aren't only limited to relationships. I know a lot of
No.
times they're talked
Yeah.
about in the realm of relationships, but setting boundaries in terms of food or exercise or
Work.
how many hours you
Yeah.
watch Netflix, how much work you do, if you bring
Yeah.
work home, like all of these things are all boundaries. But they are the way they are right now, pretty much because we're lazy and it's like
Yeah.
just it's not bad enough to make us change them
Well, and then
until it gets to that
no,
point. Yeah.
that's a good point. Like I think there's a threshold where when you cross it, right, it's like that's when you're usually willing to set it, but at that point it's usually really bad. So it's really helpful to think about this ahead of time. I actually know somebody who was they were working like basically all the time because they were stuck in meetings all day at work, and then like they would have to do their work after literally the work day, and like they got to the point where they were just like run down and stuff, and they finally started to set boundaries with like, I'm not doing this after this point, like no more. And you just saw this significant change, right, in their happiness, in their mood, and their attitude, because it's like you were letting yourself be taken advantage of, basically. That's what it is, right? And people, and it's funny too, because I think people will people have all different reasons for what they do. And so it's not always necessarily that people are trying to be mean to you or trying to take advantage of you. They just will. If they don't even realize it, I think sometimes. And I think some of the
Mhm.
hardest boundaries we have to set with ourselves are related to work, our feelings of success, family, relationships are always really difficult, boundaries with ourselves and like, making, I think a lot of times too, maybe another, is it a healthy way to think of it too, might not even be just boundaries, but also like just what's life do we want? Creating that life means creating clear guidelines or clear sort of like path or plan. And that means, allowing and disallowing things.
Yeah, definitely. Because it really does come down to what you want in life. And I think part of the clarity for me, especially in this most recent situation, was there was just this YouTube video that came on automatically that was about loving yourself. And it's like, if you truly loved yourself, you wouldn't associate with those types of people. And I looked at it and I was like, yeah, like, what am I doing wasting my time? Like, I know it feels a little bit pleasurable sometimes, but like, why am I wasting my time? There's so many better people that I could be associating my time with, or the great people that I already know, like you, like a lot of my other friends and family that I could be spending more time with. So, like, what am I doing wasting my time? And like that for me was very clear because I saw, it's kind of like the short term and the long term game. Like I very clearly saw the short term pleasure. That was tangible. It was right here. But like the long term uh, problems that came along with it, that it was like, off in the distance. I can get this pleasure
Yeah.
now. But like once I saw that, like I was really causing myself to lose all of those benefits in the long term. And once that got really clear that I was losing that, then it was like, okay, now it's time to change things.
No, it's
And
it's a good example. I was just gonna say because I think that's a really good example because also like that's one of the things that's difficult for a lot of us. It's that short term is tangible. It's right there. And a lot of what we do is short term oriented. It's not long term. We're focused on that pleasure now. We're focused on the benefit now. We don't think about the long term. And I think that's another thing that's difficult, right? I mean, I know like in my own life, I've had numerous times where I've had to set boundaries because like, somebody I know like is very negative and like I just couldn't, I felt like an obligation to speak with them all the time or to talk with them at least regularly and all. And I just found that like the more it just got worse and worse. And it was like I would be upset, I would be in a bad mood, and it just wasn't worth it. So I had to like put a curtain, set a boundary there. But it's hard. It is very difficult to do.
here's the other cool thing was like as bad as it was after I set the boundaries, because like immediately afterwards I was like, oh, this sucks. I shouldn't have made
Yeah.
that decision. I should go back. It only lasted like a few days, maybe a week, and then all of a sudden I don't even think about it anymore. Like this was, I
Well,
mean, granted, this was a relatively minor type of thing. It wasn't like an end of relationship breaking up type of thing, but like 3 days and I forgot about it. But those 3 days sucked. So
yeah.
like don't disillusion yourself that you're on this new spiritual journey. All of a sudden you set new boundaries. Your life's going to be awesome. No, it's going to suck for a while, but you have to be willing to embrace the suck.
You do. And I think too, you have to embrace the suck. And the other thing is too, I think for a lot of us, especially when it's bad enough that you're starting to think about boundaries, when you set them, it will be hard because it also means your life's going to change. You're not going to be seeing that person. You're going to be doing the same things you were doing with them. But I think most of the time, the right boundaries will feel really good within a few days because all of a sudden that stress is out of your life. That problem's out of your life. It might take longer. If it's a really like a long-term or old relationship like family or relation, something like significant other or something, it could take even longer. That's true. But I think you will notice the benefit because you'll start to feel better and better and less stressed and less pressured and less negativity as you go on in the future. And I think that's an important marker for like when you've done the right thing, and even like with work and stuff and other things like that, like knowing what's right for you. I mean, like I mentioned to you too, like with my job with teaching, like and all, like it's all they're hiring is like part time now. So like I stopped doing anything extra for work because I just set that. I was like, there's no point. Why would I do this? Like I'm not wasting my time. I'm wasting my energy. There's no like long term thing there. So it's over. Like there's no reason to do that. That's a boundary now. I'm not doing anything extra for it because it's just not worth it. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
being taken advantage of is what effectively it is.
Exactly. Yeah, and so like with boundaries, and if it is something that's going to take a long time, it's going to suck for a long time, you also have to remember that really you only have to get through today.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
the suck, you only have to get through today. once you go to sleep, it's over for the day. So just focusing on that does help you get through the longer periods of suck. But I think we've talked enough, or at least initially, about how they suck. So let's talk a
Yeah.
little bit about what are boundaries and
Oh,
how to set them and things like that. Because I actually have a very bad negative association with the word boundaries. Like I hear that word and I'm just like, "Ugh," because it's like in all of these books, like it's like this buzzword. It's like
okay.
boundaries. It's like,
I mean,
why do you
I
not
would
have a life you want? Boundaries. Why does your
boundaries.
life suck? Boundaries. Like why did this not work out? Boundaries. And so it's just like, so it
Well,
just
I
got
think you
such a
could.
negative association.
I think you could even get. Look, I think I get why people use the term boundaries because, like, it's like it gives you that imagery of like you're very clear about what your path is, about who you are, and so anything outside of that, is not allowed, right? So I get that, but it is. I think it is very poorly used as jargon within that industry, and it sucks in that sense. So I think another way maybe to think about it is like maybe if you want to put a positive spin on it, is being more intentional, exercising your agency, making your own choices. Because a lot of times I think the instances where we need boundaries are instances where we're not making choices ourselves, where we're letting
Mm.
somebody else, external circumstances, whether it's like fear about losing our job or work or whatever, or not being good enough, or it's fear about some obligation we have, or some idea that we possess about family or about friendship and what it means, and this need to keep doing it. We're not making a choice. We're letting some tradition, practice, idea, concept, whatever, dictate our choices. So I think a more positive spin is just it's making choices. It's making clear choices and being intentional in how you live.
That's a really good way to look at it because it does a much better job of summarizing what it is, and it even gives you a little bit more hope towards the outcome you want. Because like
What?
boundaries, you just think you like set up this roadblock and then there's no problems.
Yeah,
It's never going to suck. I put that boundary up. I don't have to worry about it. But that's
yeah.
never the way it is. So like if you're just like, well, this is where I choose to be intentional with my life, I realize it's going to suck for a while, but that's because I'm getting in that direction that I want.
Well, you hit the nail on the head too. That's what I always hate about boundary talk too, and all the self-help books. Is it's like it's very like, superficial and empty. It's like I'm just gonna put up this wall and not deal with it. But it's like, but no, you should be actively dealing with it. That's the point. That's what you're doing. You're making by putting up a boundary is an active thing. It's not passive. It shouldn't be reactive. It should be active. It should be a choice you make. And I think that's one of the problems is I think they give people a poor representation of what it is and what it does for you. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. So how does somebody know if they need to set boundaries?
I mean, I think in my own life, I guess a lot of times, unfortunately, I think the times that I've realized that I need to set boundaries is far into it, and I wish I had set them sooner. Because a lot of times, I think if I had been more clear, more conscious of what was bothering me, it might have even preserved a relationship rather than needing for it to end. Things like that. I think there is some importance there. I think a lot of times when we feel like things are out of control, when we feel like we don't have, a clear idea of who we are or what we're doing, when we feel stressed or overwhelmed, those are all good times to start asking yourself, maybe I need to set some boundaries because clearly things in my life are not, mine. It's not my life. And I think that's an easy way to sort of ask yourself, like, do I feel completely overwhelmed? Do I feel completely stressed? Do I feel like things are just, is this relationship, does it feel unhealthy? I think there is a sense in which they feel unhealthy too, a lot of times, right? We just don't
Yeah.
want to admit
I
it.
I know for me, yeah, I know we don't want to admit it. I know for me, a lot of times, like I notice it when there's some dissatisfaction going on in my life, particularly dissatisfaction when cognitively I think there should be some satisfaction going on. So like there's some cognitive dissonance going on because
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
doing this thing which I think I should be getting rewarded for, and I feel worse afterwards. And all of a sudden I'm like, this isn't adding up. Like something's wrong. And
Yeah.
so
That's a good, oh, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
yeah, so those are the times when I just realize that like, okay, something's amiss. Like what has to go on here?
That's a really good one too. That kind of really captures too. I think that idea. I think it's a lot of times because when you have that feeling of cognitive dissonance, it's like it's something you think you should be doing. Does that make sense? Like I should be seeing
Hmm.
this person. I have an obligation to her. This is usually fun, and so you kind of trick yourself into thinking that the relationship, or maybe it'll get better next time. Maybe it's just today, but it's like ask yourself, has it been like this consistently? Because then maybe you need one. And
Yeah.
it's like I think too, a lot of it is just being clear about who you are and what you want. And I think that's the biggest part of this, and it's hard. It is hard because we clearly all struggle with this. So it's
Hmm.
not like, we're
Yeah.
alone.
Yeah, but there, I mean, so like just we can each give a couple examples of times when we set boundaries just to kind of give people a better idea. But like
Yeah.
I can remember one that made a big impact in my life was just like no social media. So like I remember back when I was in vet school, how I would spend an inordinate amount, a lot of time on Facebook. So like, I
All
would get
right.
lost on it a
Yeah.
couple hours a day, and I was like, this is ridiculous. And then those studies
Yeah.
started to come out that like the more time people spend on social media, the more depressed they are. And I was like, well, this is stupid. What am I doing this for? I made it a boundary where it was only Facebook Fridays. Any other day of the week, I couldn't look at Facebook. Fridays, I could look as much as I want. And what the funny thing is that like that actually completely phased Facebook and all other social media out of my life because like I saw
Yeah, you
how
got.
unnecessary it was, and like I would check on Fridays, but then I was like, this really didn't add anything to my life, and then all of a sudden it just pretty much disappeared. So that was one thing. Yeah.
No, I was gonna say it's funny because I've done that too, and what you immediately find, I think, is that all the things you thought were new and changing and stuff before, when you were doing it regularly, you realize it's the same old over and over. And I
Mm-hmm.
and I think that that's a great example too, because that's something that's like both deals with relationships, but also with your relationship to something, some practice or something that's not necessarily another person directly. I really like that one because I think that's one of the harder ones too sometimes to figure out, because we like to convince ourselves that we're getting a lot from these things when we aren't always. And sometimes like
Mm-hmm.
in this case, like a boundary might just be like establishing what use it has in your life. Does this have a direct use in my life, and what kind is this part of like the kind of life I want to live? Like, does this have a role? And it might be that, yeah, maybe you use Instagram or Facebook for work, so you use it for that purpose and that's it, and like something like that. But yeah, I think that's a really good example. I like that one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did you
Yeah,
have any
one of
that you
my.
were thinking of?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I've been plenty of cases where it does it. I guess well, I mentioned a couple already. So like, what my one family member was very negative, obviously. But thinking more, I guess more recently was I was having a hard time recently because I was kind of had a lot of different things going on. So I had, I was working, I had a project that I was working on, and then I was trying to learn some other stuff and just a lot of different things. And I realized I was starting to get very frustrated and depressed. I felt like I wasn't getting enough done every day. And what I realized was I needed to kind of essentially set a boundary so I could focus on one thing and get it done at a time, basically. So I started using essentially boundaries to structure my day more, which worked really effectively. Almost like not
Mm-hmm.
like a routine, but telling myself, like, this I'm going to get done later because I need to get this takes priority. Essentially, like prioritization, I think, can be a form of boundary where I
Mm-hmm.
was letting myself, prioritize something that's really important and blocking the other stuff for the time being and realizing that that's okay too. And not feeling
Yeah.
like, I'm not getting enough done or whatever.
Well, that's a really important one because I mean, for me, very much, and I think probably a lot of other people relate as well, where we just feel like no matter how much we do, it's never enough. And
Yeah.
like, I'll get to the end of the day, and at the end of the day, I'll reflect on what I've done today, and I'll be like, oh my gosh, like,
Yeah.
wow, that's a lot of stuff I did. And yet, like, before I reflect, I feel like, man, I didn't do anything today. Like, could I have gotten a single thing done today? And then I look back and I'm like, whoa. So like what you're saying there with prioritization, it helps get the important stuff done, but also setting the boundaries to where it's okay not to accomplish the other stuff because you're focusing on the more important things.
Yeah, and like giving yourself a chance too. Like I think sometimes like boundaries can be a way to give yourself a chance to enjoy yourself too and not feel so pressured. Because I think it's so easy to get caught up in like these ideas of success, these ideas, and not and that's the other funny thing is like I think a lot of us get caught up in it and don't even know what we really want or what it really means. And I think that's a crucial thing too. It's like because it really boundaries are just about knowing yourself. It's about knowing the life that you want and being able to, like I said, be intentional and create it. And so a lot of it, I think, is it's hard because we really just don't know. And So a lot of it might require that self-reflection as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Another area where I've set boundaries, and I would say it's probably the more difficult area for me to do it, because like changing myself is easy, but like change
Yeah.
when it involves other people, so like friends, acquaintances, relationships, that for me personally has been more difficult to do. But like oftentimes it
Yeah.
comes to a point where I'm just like, this person is just like, uh, almost all the time it's like the word that I get that makes me move is like, this is just toxic. Like,
Yeah.
it's literally poisoning my life. This is toxic. It's not
Toxic is a
moving me in
great
a good
word though.
direction.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Because as soon as I realize that, I'm like, well, I don't want toxins in my life. So get the heck out of my life. And
Yeah.
then that's like the easiest way to cut it off. But like oftentimes it'll be like, either people who are just really negative, or just for some reason they just rub you wrong, or they just take advantage of you, or whatever it is. And all of these things, it's just like my life is not getting any better from associating with this person, and birds of a feather flock together. So
Yeah.
I don't want to go wherever they're going, so I need to change,
I
move
can
away
give you
from them.
I can give you a really good example of that. So in one case, one of my family members who was really negative, you know, it was really hard to set boundaries for this reason. So one, I knew it was toxic, so I knew it wasn't benefiting me. I always was angry, upset, it was making things worse for me as well. And I couldn't move forward in the way that I needed to, right, with the relationship. However, setting boundaries also meant though that, other family members and stuff, right, what's going on? Blah, and dealing with that, which made it, even harder because then you have this like the external pressures, the sense of obligation, all of that comes into play, right? It makes it really challenging and difficult. So like part of it was like I had to actually like just cut things off for a while just to get to the point where it was healthy again or correct. It took a long time and it was super hard because again, you have like the other birds in your ear or whatever the hell that phrase is. I can't remember what's the term,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, and so it was really difficult. I think that's something that a lot of us struggle with too, is that when it's ourself, it's easy because you're making a decision about your own life, easy, right? But when it's other people, or even like, when it involves family and stuff or friends or whatever, it can be really hard because then other people might get involved, external actors. And sometimes you just have to tell them, like, look, this is not working for me. It's really unhealthy. It's affecting me. I need to deal with myself first before I can engage in this again, or before I know what's going to be right for me, and just be honest about it. And it's not always easy to be honest.
Yeah, and everybody wants to voice their opinion about it,
Oh God, yeah.
especially, oh my gosh, especially when it's family related. Yeah, they all want
Oh
to
yeah.
voice their opinion because everybody should get along in a family. That's like the craziest thing that I find, is like this idea that families are supposed to get along. And I was like, that just doesn't work except on TV, and like
Yeah,
maybe in
yeah.
some families that really, really put some work into it. Because for the most part, you have a bunch of different personalities. They all have different things that they're concerned with doing. So problems are
Mm.
going to abound. Like I heard this funny quote that it's like, you're very lucky if you have a happy, loving family that lives in another state.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like, so
Well,
it's like, yeah.
I think you're right there. Okay, so you made a really good point though, which is we watch TV, we watch movies, we see these idealized, really in a lot of ways, impossible relationships. This idea of family that's perfect, where everybody helps everybody with everything and they're involved all the time. This idea of friendship, where like, look at Friends and stuff. Like they all live right near each other in the city. They seem to not work. Like things are great. It's like it's
And
absurd. And
every problem is resolved in 30 minutes or less.
yeah, and everybody gets involved with all those problems and has really good, helpful advice.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, or like look at relationships, like we look at romantic comedies, like somebody running down the street and all this stuff. Like so we form because of like I think because a lot of things we engage with entertainment wise, we form these really unrealistic, absurd conceptions of what it should be like. Like family always sticks together. It's like, no, they don't, first of all. And second of all, has that person always stuck there for you? Were they always there for you? Do you need to do the same? Really? Like ask yourself. I think a lot of times that's an important question too, is like whatever your idea is that's making you feel like you have this obligation, ask yourself, does the other person meet that obligation? That is always a helpful way for me to sort of figure out like, am I doing all the work? Am I doing everything? Is it like, am I holding this together because I have some belief about it that doesn't make any sense, really? you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, any other areas that you want to discuss, or should we continue talking about why boundaries suck?
We can continue. I think that's good. Yeah,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So, yeah, those are some good areas. Like, just to give you guys an idea of areas where you might set boundaries. And, like, boundaries aren't any different than New Year's Eve
No,
resolutions.
no.
They're pretty much the same thing. Because, like, New Year's Eve, everybody sets out, I'm going to go to the gym every day. I'm only going to eat 1,500 calories a day, no more desserts. And, like, everybody sets these boundaries. But the thing is, with New Year's, nobody takes them seriously. So, like,
No.
they'll hold that boundary for 2 or 3 days. Whereas, like, real boundaries, when what you were saying earlier, Danny, with like these things being intentional with your life. Once you decide the life you want and you choose to be intentional, these are things that you're going to want to carry out, as difficult as they are, because this is going to give you the life that you want, instead of
Yeah.
the life that's uncomfortable that you're stuck with right now.
Actually, on that point too, I think this is really helpful and something to keep in mind, which is I know in my own past, a lot of times when I've struggled to keep boundaries that were really healthy for me, is because I was trying to do too many things at once in terms of changes in my life. And I think this is something, look, we read these self-help books, we have ideas, and we're like, okay, I'm going to do this. It's like just like New Year's resolutions. Like, this year's the year, right? I'm going to make my life the life I want. And we decide, okay, so I'm going to start exercising, dieting. I'm going to have the right friendships, right relationships. I'm going to get a new job. I'm going to do, and you list 100 different things, and then you try to do them all at once, and it falls apart because it's way too much. And I realized, like, probably about it was a few years ago, I guess, but like I started because I was in kind of a bad place, and I started to just do one thing at a time. Let me get rid of the bad relationships. Start there. Focus on the healthy, good relationships that I have. Get rid of the bad ones. It was hard, and it was a lot of difficulty that I faced with. Then it's like, let me focus on my career. But that way, and once you get that self-development ball rolling, I think it does. It's like snowball effect. Like things just get better and better. It gets easier and easier. Things get more positive. Like it just very quickly and exponentially grows. And I think that's great. But you need to see that growth first before you can make all those other changes, because it's just too freaking much for one person, I think. And then that was a really eye-opening thing for me, was like when you try to just set, and that's the other thing I hate about that self. Like it's like just set boundaries. It's like, well, if you try to set all those boundaries, you're going to fail, because you're just going to create all this tension all of a sudden, rather than dealing with the most important ones first and kind of step, sort of a stepping stone your way to success.
I'm glad you said that about focusing on just one thing. Because, like, I just recently saw this again where I was getting distracted trying to do all these different things and, like, making them all equally important as well.
Yeah. It's like insane.
And and because I'd be making progress in some areas, but not other areas. And because I wasn't making the same amazing progress in all these areas, my life was terrible. Like, I just had
Yeah.
constant problems. Whereas, like, once I forget where I heard it again, but someone was just saying, like, if you try and focus on more than one thing, you're just being an idiot. Like, you can't.
Yeah.
Our focus can only be limited to one thing. So why would you bother trying to do it on more than one thing? And once I heard that, I was like, yeah, that does make sense, because I remember times historically where I focused exclusively on one thing. And when I did that, I
Yeah.
knocked that thing out. And
Yeah.
so, like, all of a sudden I started, like you were saying there, just focusing on one thing again. And it relieves the stress of all the other stuff that I want to do and that I'm still doing, but I may not be doing it perfectly, because that's not my one thing right now. My one
Yeah.
thing right now is a thing that I focus on, and I put a lot of energy into it. And I'm just focusing on that one thing right now. And once that one thing is done, then I can choose another one thing. And that'll
Yeah.
just be the way to go.
And no, that's a good point too, because it's like I think a lot of times we forget too, when we're setting these boundaries too, they take a lot of work sometimes to get right and to make it work. Like think about, like, for instance, it's just easy. Like if you're setting boundaries with work, that might take a while to get right and to do it correctly where you get the outcome you want, right? And it's not like that's going to be immediate, like I'm just going to stop doing this, because that might be detrimental to you and your job. So it's like sometimes you have to, like, it might take work talking to people, doing all these things. And so you're not going to have time for all this other stuff. But by doing that, you're making time and you're making your life right later. And that's the point, it's getting to that payoff. So you want to do these right, because I think, the benefit is absolutely, I think doing boundaries right, living intentionally right, the benefit is just like astronomical because you're living your own life. I mean, it's impossible to compare it to anything else. So I think that's crucial. But you have to get to the point where you know what you want, and you have to do them in the right order, I think, or correctly. Yeah.
Absolutely. And just remembering from the start that it's going to suck for a while. Like
It
just
always sucks.
preparing yourself for that. Because that's one thing that a lot of the self-help books don't tell you about. They're just like, you have problems, just set boundaries, and it's just sunshine and rainbows from here on out. And it never is. Because first you have to go through a ton of suck before you get the benefit of it. But if you remember from the outset that the suck is going to be there, it'll prepare you for it. It'll let you get through it mentally. Like, you remember, Danny and I both did this book, The Artist's Way, a while ago.
Yeah.
And it was,
I love how
she was like, there's 3 sections to the book. The first section you're going to love. The second section is going to suck terribly. And then the third section is going to get better. And like, I think when we were doing it, the first section, it was like great. And we're like, wow, she was totally right.
Brand
about that.
new, right? It was brand new. It was fun. Yeah.
And then the second section totally sucked, just like she said. And we were like, wow, she called that. We knew it was going to suck, but let's just keep doing it. And then the third section, it was supposed to get better, but it sucked even worse. So,
but I think it was helpful that she called it, though, in the beginning for the second section, because otherwise, you would have given up. And it was like that. It was that plateau period, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also like kind of looking at the goal versus the journey. Like, we talked about this in previous episodes, having a goal focus versus a journey focus, because most people have a goal focus and they forget that 99% of the time they spend is going to be in the journey. So if instead
life
you
is
have
the
journey
right?
focus,
Yeah.
Bingo.
Yeah.
So like, if you have the journey focus and you realize, okay, the goal is to clearly have this boundary and have my life be whatever having this boundary means. But the journey is going to be however long it takes to get there. And initially it's going to suck a lot in the beginning. And then I'm going to get a little bit more skilled at handling this boundary. And then it'll get easier. And then eventually I probably won't have to think about it. But that's the journey. And I'm going to have to take that journey if I want to get to that goal. So realizing that you're doing that up front.
I think that's a great point too, because you're preparing yourself for it. You're admitting to yourself the cost of getting the life you want, basically, right? Which is, I have to get through all of this. And I always like to try to think of it too as, it's not even just suck, it's just the challenge of it. That if I want this is the challenge, the obstacle I have to overcome. Everything I will, there's going to be some resistance in the world, right? And I have to will the power or the strength to overcome that resistance. And I think thinking of it in that way is great too, because it gets you to where you need to go. And you're prepared for it, you're ready for it, you know it. And I think that also, when you think that way, that helps you not overdo it, not do too many, because you're aware, okay, if I'm going to reset this relationship, or if I'm going to reset my relationship to this technology or this work, it's going to take a lot of energy at first, because that first part's going to be the most difficult. There's going to be the most obstacles. It's going to take the most time. I might have to figure out new ways to overcome things or to do things. And so that's going to take time. But once I get past that part, then I can do something else, because then I'll be on the easier part of it, where it's starting to level out. I've got the skills that I need. I can deal with it,
And that's also important, or that's also why it's important to only tackle one thing at a time.
Yeah.
Because when you start out, there's going to be a lot of suck. So if you start out setting boundaries for 5 different things all at the same time, it's going to suck a lot in the beginning. That's probably why most people quit their New Year's resolutions, because they go and make a handful of resolutions, and then the first few days of the year, it just is a bunch of suck. And they're like, forget it. I quit. My life was more comfortable then.
Yeah. Well, and that's just it. You hit the nail on the head, right? It's like, even a shitty situation that's comfortable, that we know, we will take most of the time over the unknown. And I think because it's familiar, and it sucks that we do this, but when you try to make too many changes at once, you make it so much worse for yourself that you make yourself afraid of change. You make yourself afraid of self-development. And I think if you really want to live your own life, you have to be very careful about how you approach it. And I say this from experience too. I did it wrong for so long. I kept trying to change all these things at once, not thinking in my head, like, I can totally handle it. No matter how many times it didn't work. Like, I failed doing it that way, like, numerous times. And then I realized, like, no, I have to deal with the big things first, because they're the ones that are causing me the most problems. They're preventing me the most from living my life. And until I get over those, the other shit doesn't even matter. anyway, because my life's still going to suck if they're there. So I need to get those out of the way, and then I can, and I think that's the other crucial thing.
Isn't it funny how important it is to know yourself? Like there are these
Yeah,
things
it's insane.
where we know ourselves, but we're like, no, I can totally do that. And then we just fail miserably. And they're like, oh, if I would have just known myself and just trusted that I know myself,
Yeah.
then I could have handled it. Yeah.
And be honest with yourself too, dude. It's so funny because, like, I mean, I think, well, it's funny too because I think there is a healthy way in which we all lie to ourselves, which helps us, overcome things. That helps us be confident, all that, which is good. That's fine. But that also like has that negative side where like we do it way too much, and like even when we know ourselves and know our limits, we'll lie to ourselves and be like, nah, it's not limit. I can tell you, whatever. And like it's just it's hilarious because we just fall on our face so many times. But that's okay. Yeah. And I think that's the other thing. Like if you tried to set boundaries and you set too many and it failed, that's okay. You at least tried. So now you know what to expect in those areas. You know what in a sense, you know what the obstacles are going to be. So you're kind of more prepared for it. Because to be honest, that's the other thing. Like, I think when you set these boundaries or when you start to live intentionally, like sometimes, you can't anticipate always what the obstacles are going to be. Like sometimes, like you might not know that somebody might find it very bad, whatever you're doing. They might be very upset, and that might take time for you to deal with that. Or you might realize that, oh God, I got to start learning how to do this thing now. Like you just don't always know. And so that's also part of it, why I think it's very healthy to set just one at a time at first.
Yeah. And being okay with, it not working. Like a lot of people assume that it's going to be easy because we think it's just this thing that we put up. But there's that saying that like a master fails more time than the amateur even tries.
Yeah.
So like just remembering that you're probably going to fail a lot at boundaries and you're going to suck. Like a lot of the times, the first few relationships where I broke up with the person, guess what? I tried contacting them and making it work again, and it never did. But like, so like realizing those things, having those failures so you can recognize those as reference points for when you try it again in the future, you know what to do.
And not getting upset with yourself, because it's just like, I think we all do it. And I think once you get it going in the right, I think that's the other thing, is have hope. Because once you get it going in the right direction, once you get your life going in the right direction, things will start to unfold very rapidly, I think. And they get better and better. But getting there is really hard. Don't trust anyone that tells you it's easy. And just, keep at it. I think that's the best way to look at it.
If they tell you it's easy, they're just trying to sell you their system.
That's all it is, literally.
Yep. So there, in a nutshell, you have boundaries and why boundaries suck. This is the Existential Stoic podcast. Make sure to check us out on all of the podcasting services, also on YouTube as well. I'm Randy. That's Danny. I'll catch you later, Danny. Have a good one. Bye-bye, Danny.
Later, Randy.